Now we've also got two shapers in the modulation pane that can be used to define a new output value for every input value. So it's kind of like another form of secondary modulation. The way I showed you how aftertouch affects the frequency of the LFO, we can use an input source here and then create custom values based on the input field. So we can get, for example, more complex LFOs. That's one idea. We can use an LFO as an input to the shaper, and by painting in a curve, we can generate more complex waveform shapes other than the just 7 or 8 that are available there. Now, it's also got different interpolation. We can shift things around. We can randomize. We can smooth. We can fill exponentially, draw, and we can have a custom number of steps and so on. And we get two different waveforms over there, and we can keep clicking on that to keep varying it. And here's where we set the input source. Now I'm going to go to Shaper 1 here, and I've got, for example, a little 16-step pattern here. And let's listen to this example with the sound from last video with some chords. Now I'm going to dial up the Shaper 1. We assign it here as we do any modulation source. We have S1 for Shaper 1, S2 for Shaper 2. So in this case, Shaper 1. Let me just take this off and jump ahead here. I'm going to show you this without the input. So it's not doing anything really right now. Just a static kind of offset. But if I set the input here, it could be at one of the pads, but let's say I set the LFO 1. I've got this set for dotted half notes and a ramp. So I'm creating a more complex pattern. And of course, we can vary it however we want. We can have steps that are low and where we'll get kind of very dull notes if I put that at a low value. So you see how you can get interesting kind of shapes and rhythms. Now, let me turn this off and turn on the granular engine because I want to show you a kind of interesting use case for this. Here's a grain sound, and now let's say I'm going to assign the Shaper 1 here to jitter. I'm going to dial this up. We have the option here for position of cursor position. So with this as a modulation source, we can define a specific value for each position. So it's alternating between these few positions. I can set dramatic values. And you can see in the momentary modulation here that it's setting different values based on the position of the cursor. You can assign it here as well. I'm going to assign it to the panning as well, just for fun to see what that does. We can even assign it to the amp envelope if we want to get, let's say, silence for some of the steps. Let me dial this up, put this down. If I put it all the way down, we'll get complete silence, of course. But we want a little bit. And then, of course, we can combine that with the sample engine, too. So some ideas on how you can use the shaper for these custom shapes. We use an input of another modulation source into here, optionally cursor position, but not necessarily. And then we can generate more complex modulation sources by incorporating these steps, shapes, or patterns with the primary modulation source. We'll continue with more in the next video.